Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're coming to you live with some huge breaking news out of D.C.
Yeah, this is a big one for sure.
So a federal judge has just issued a ruling just within the past couple hours, temporarily blocking the Trump administration from deporting individuals suspected of being part of the Tren de Aragua gang. And it's already sparking some really intense reactions, especially among lawmakers.
Definitely seeing some strong opinions already. It really boils down to this escalating tension between the executive branch and the judiciary. I mean, we're seeing Republicans slam this ruling. They're calling it judicial overreach flat out, and they're already saying they'll take steps to prevent this from happening again. But then on the flip side, you've got Democrats who are defending the judge, really emphasizing the separation of powers, the idea of due process, all that. So yeah, it's a big constitutional showdown brewing.
Okay, so let's dive into the specifics here. We're talking about a temporary restraining order that was issued by Judge James Boasberg. He's a D.C. Circuit Court judge appointed by President Obama. And this order is specifically blocking the Trump administration from using the Alien Enemies Act to deport Venezuelan nationals suspected of being part of this Tren de Aragua gang. And the Republican response has been pretty immediate and pretty fiery.
Yeah, no kidding. It seems like the core of their argument is that you have a single judge essentially overstepping his bounds, interfering with what they see as a clear executive branch power, especially when it comes to foreign policy and national security. And they're not mincing words either.
Right.
Like Representative Derek Van Orden, he just came out and said, quote, "Jurists that are acting in an unconstitutional manner, they need to go, period."
Wow. Strong words.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty unambiguous.
And it doesn't stop there. I mean, Representative Troy Nehls, he was even more blunt. I mean, he just asked, quote, "Who the hell do they think they are?"
Right. There's definitely a sense of frustration, maybe even a feeling like the executive branch is being undermined here.
Yeah. And this whole thing is bringing up this much bigger debate about the judiciary's role, how much power they have to check the executive branch. I mean, Representative Michael Rulli even weighed in on this, expressing concerns about, quote, "activist judges potentially overriding foreign policy decisions." He really stressed that the executive branch should have the final say in these matters.
Yeah, and, that taps into this long-running debate about the balance of power between the different branches of government. It's like one of those fundamental questions that keeps coming up.
So beyond the strong words, though, what are Republicans actually planning to do about this ruling? It sounds like they're gearing up for some concrete action.
Well, it seems like they're pursuing a multi-pronged strategy here. First off, the House Judiciary Committee is planning to hold a hearing early next week specifically focused on what they're calling, quote-unquote, activist judges.
So they're really shining a spotlight on this issue.
Exactly. They're scrutinizing the judiciary's role, how they're using their power to check the executive branch. It could be the first step towards some kind of legislative action. We'll have to see.
And speaking of legislative action, it sounds like that's definitely on the table, right?
Yeah, Representative August Pfluger has indicated that they're actively looking into potential legislation to address this whole situation. The details are still unclear, but it seems like they're exploring ways to maybe limit the ability of individual judges to block executive actions, especially in sensitive areas like immigration and foreign policy. He also mentioned supporting the administration in fighting it legally, so there's a legal strategy as well as a legislative one in play.
And we also heard from Representative Anna Paulina Luna, who talked about using their legislative toolkit to help the administration carry out its agenda and meet what she views as its constitutional obligations. And it's interesting, she also brought up these claims about Democrats deliberately appointing obstructionist justices before Trump even took office.
Yeah, that adds a whole other layer to this. It suggests that some Republicans see these legal challenges as part of a broader political strategy, not just disagreements about legal interpretation. It's definitely heating up the political climate around all of this.
Absolutely. And Representative Van Orden also invoked the inscription on the Supreme Court building, equal justice under the law, and argued that the judge in this case is overreaching. He actually said, and I'm quoting here, "That dude, he's not a king." So clearly they see this as a direct challenge to executive power and maybe a misunderstanding of what the judiciary is supposed to do.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Representative Rulli seems to be advocating for a more cautious long-term approach. He called for his party to be very methodical in addressing this, maybe even codify law to prevent this from happening again. But he also acknowledged that it's not going to be a quick fix.
Right. It sounds like he recognizes the complexity of legislative solutions and the potential for even more legal battles down the road.
Yeah, it's not a simple situation to untangle.
So now let's shift gears a bit and look at the other side of the aisle. How are Democrats responding to this ruling and the Republican backlash?
Well, as you might expect, they have a very different take on it. They're largely framing the judge's ruling as a legitimate use of the separation of powers, a key principle to prevent any one branch of government from becoming too dominant. They also emphasize the importance of due process.
Right.
And Representative Jesus Garcia really zeroed in on that, saying that due process is the fundamental issue here. He also expects the courts to continue playing a strong role in making sure that executive actions are legal and constitutional.
Representative Greg Stanton also weighed in on this, and he was very firm in his belief in the separation of powers. He even called the federal courts a co-equal branch of government, stating that all branches, including the executive and legislative, have to follow court decisions.
Exactly. It's a direct counter to the Republican argument that the judge overstepped his authority. It shows how Democrats see the judiciary as a vital part of maintaining balance in our government.
Yeah. And Representative Eric Swalwell was also pretty vocal in his criticism of President Trump's personal attacks on the judge, calling him, a radical left lunatic and things like that. Swalwell emphasized how important it is for the judiciary to be independent, free from political pressure. He suggested that these kinds of attacks threaten the very foundation of our legal system.
Yeah, I mean, that's a serious concern. If the judicial branch isn't perceived as impartial, then the whole system is undermined.
Absolutely. And Representative Adam Smith brought up an interesting legal point, saying that the use of the Alien Enemies Act might not even be justified in this case because there's been no formal declaration of war. He argued that the judge is essentially ensuring that the executive branch is following the law as written by Congress, not overstepping its boundaries.
Yeah, that's an important point. The Alien Enemies Act is a very specific law with a particular historical context. It's typically used during declared wars to deal with threats from enemy aliens. Smith's argument is that the judge is not making foreign policy, but rather upholding the law as Congress intended it.
Right. And it's also important to remember that this isn't an isolated incident. The Trump administration has faced these kinds of legal challenges before when it comes to policy decisions.
Yeah, that's right. Reports show that there have been over a dozen injunctions from various district court judges across the country blocking different Trump administration policies. So it's a pattern of the courts reviewing and challenging the legality of these actions. This latest ruling on the Tren de Aragua deportations is part of a larger trend.
And to highlight how impactful Judge Boasberg's ruling is, we're hearing that a federal appellate court has actually refused to put a hold on his decision. So what does that mean in the short term?
Well, it means that, for now, the administration is legally barred from deporting these people under the Alien Enemies Act while the legal challenges play out. It just adds another layer of complexity to an already complicated situation.
So to sum up, what we're witnessing is a real clash between the executive branch trying to put its policies into action, especially in crucial areas like immigration and national security, and the judiciary, whose role is to make sure those policies are legal and respect basic rights like due process. It really exposes the inherent tensions and checks and balances within our system of government.
Absolutely. You can see it in the starkly different statements and planned actions from Republicans and Democrats. They fundamentally disagree about what the separation of powers means and how much authority judges should have. Republicans are all about decisive executive action, especially on issues they see as vital to national security, while Democrats stress the crucial role of judicial oversight in protecting individual rights and preventing the executive branch from abusing its power. It gets right to the heart of how our democracy is supposed to work.
Yeah, and this story is far from over. The upcoming House Judiciary Committee hearing is likely to be a platform for even more debate. It could be the starting point for legislation that tries to reshape the power of judges to block executive actions. So we're looking at a potentially long and complex legal and political battle ahead.
For sure. That hearing will give us a better idea of the Republican strategy and what specific legal changes they might propose. It also raises some really big questions about what this means for the relationship between the judiciary and the executive branch in the long run, and how this might affect how policies are implemented in the future. This is a developing story we'll definitely be keeping a close eye on.
This whole situation really makes you think about the balance that needs to be struck between allowing for swift action from the executive branch, especially when national security is at stake, and upholding the constitutional safeguards that are meant to protect individual rights and keep government power in check. How will these legal battles affect the dynamic between different branches of government and how policies are made and enforced in the years to come? And ultimately, what does this mean for the very idea of executive power and its limits going forward? Those are some of the big questions this deep dive leaves us with.
Yeah, a lot to ponder. It will be fascinating to see how this all unfolds.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. We'll be back soon with more analysis of this developing story.
Until then.
See you then.